What gets you up in the morning?
Well, I'm very lucky. I have super interesting work, mostly at the foundation, but also a lot of work on climate change, which is all called breakthrough energy. And I've always kept my hand in advising Microsoft and tracking all the digital innovation, both because that's, in my young life, that's what I thought about the most, and there's some great things going on there. And the tools that come out of that are very important for the work I do in climate or all the foundation things, whether it's health or education or agriculture. And so particularly this last year, all of those have been, the rate of innovation has been very rapid, and that's fun for me. I get to orchestrate resources back, different approaches. And so, yeah, I love all the work I do.
And what is the most impactful tech right now? I know you love AI and what's happening there, but what are the implications of it? What other areas you think like is going to make the major change?
There's things that people got excited about, like crypto or autonomous digital organizations or metaverse, which, although there may be something there, I just don't see those as solving that many practical problems. I mean, we can move money digitally without crypto. We can have software help organizations without giving up control. So a lot of those things I don't see as fundamental changes. Whereas AI, it's a really fundamental change. Mm-hmm. I mean, just if you think, okay, I use a drawing program, and in the past that meant, okay, grab this crayon, grab this color, whereas now you just say, give me a barn, give me a sun, give me trees. Those trees aren't the right kind of tree. Give me, 12 other choices. Once the computer understands natural language, it's a super exciting threshold, a gigantic threshold in terms of how computers help humans get things done efficiently, and some things that the computer will be able to do without much human assistance at all. So yes, AI, of all the things going on, and there's a lot of great things, vaccines, nutrition, the health frontiers, all these tools actually can accelerate progress there. But the one that's really going to change the rules and over a period of decade will have a significant effect on the labor market, I would expect, is AI.
So but AI has also a lot of implications, right? It's like a database, it's like a tool. So you can, innovate energy storage. You can innovate, new medicine. It has biology, it helps with biology. So, a lot of areas changes with that. So there's this enormous rapid changes. You think we have enough institutions or enough dynamism inside institutions, to make those changes possible, or to really make the best out of the changes or tech acceleration that we're seeing right now?
Well, you have to worry that institutions move fairly slowly. Mm-hmm. There's a book called The Long Now where they talk about the fact that religions change the most slowly, yeah. Governments change the next most slowly, yeah. And kind of individuals and private sector entities are the most dynamic, because you go out of business or you lose your job, mm-hmm. You're getting feedback, and there's kind of this competition that you have to adapt according to whatever's going on. Even before AI came along, the digital social networking and how that was a factor in increasing polarization. And contrary to what most people hoped, that it actually led to more non-factual thinking, then it being, okay, now we can actually look up what's the truth about that thing, and we'll have kind of a professional, technocratic way of, mm-hmm. of moving forward. So you'd have to worry, even before this AI breakthrough gets into the mix, that our government's understanding regulating privacy, regulating the tech companies, and not having polarization really hurt democracy in a pretty deep way. I've often said, okay, that's a problem that the younger generation is going to have to solve, because although I read a lot and think about that problem a lot, I'm not sure how we're going to strike the balance. And that does involve government. It's not like the companies themselves are going to sort out those societal effects. And so then when you add AI into the mix, when I say AI, I should be clear, I mean computers being able to read and write. I mean, we've had AI for audio, speech recognition, and visual recognition, and that's become fabulous, even kind of superhuman at the kind of sensory pure recognition level. But what we haven't had is where you hand the computer a book, and instead of it just regurgitating what's on page 14, you can ask high-level questions. The specific one that I gave to the OpenAI team last summer was to pass the advanced placement biology exam, and that I could throw at it biological questions that I knew it hadn't been trained on, and if it was able to answer those accurately, I would say, okay, wow, there's an emergent capability that these models show that is hard to explain, even for the people who predicted it, and quite profound. So it's this reading and writing threshold that, yes, it's still imperfect, and it's computationally expensive, and there's some areas like complex math that's actually not super good at yet. But I see those things as being fixed, and even without those, the effect as a tool to raise productivity is incredibly dramatic. So that's the one that I think has surprised me the most in my career of digital innovation.
Yeah. So let's say institutions today, they look at content generation in a way, right? So with AI, now AI generates a lot of content, so they don't know what to do with it. Like, there are no laws about that. Like, everything is the same. There are many cases right now with the image generation, for example. So let's say, that is applied to the medicine. AI is like a black box. Like, the institutions don't understand what to approve, what not to approve. So when it comes to health or housing or biology, it's even the people who work in those institutions, who make the laws, who makes the regulations, they don't really, I don't know how we can educate everyone as fast. So I feel like at one time these institutions will spend their energy trying to protect them, or trying to train themselves, or trying to catch up, or are they going to ban innovation at one point because they can't catch up with it? Even for us, like, every day there's a new innovation, new paper, new research coming out. You need to be really dedicated, right? It's almost like we're using ChatGPT to keep up, to summarize the paper so we understand, to keep up with the innovation right now. So how are the institutions, like big organizations and institutions, I'm really interested in how the next generation institution is going to evolve.
Well, you probably will have countries that choose to limit the use of new technology, and watch other countries that may, say in the medical sector or the driving sector, they'll be more liberal. Yeah. I've always thought autonomous driving, that the US, because it's litigious and people are very sensitive about anything getting worse or any individual victim, that it wasn't the place where autonomous driving would be proven out. Over time, the regulators who work in approving, say, medical diagnostics or car safety are going to have to be digitally very sophisticated. That is, they're going to have sample sets of extreme driving conditions or biological samples that the software hasn't seen and go off and do validation of a digital tool. The FDA and U.S. drug regulator created a whole special group to look at these digital tools. Like the Gates Foundation has one where you look at a woman during pregnancy with an ultrasound and you predict, should this woman get to a hospital where they have advanced capabilities, including giving a C-section, or is this such a normal pregnancy that they can stay with a fairly limited medical care in the area they live in? And so we took that one to the regulators. They're like, wow, that thing is big and complicated. Now our response is, but the default case now is that the woman would stay and not be taken, and so it's net beneficial. But this is hard.
This is hard.
Even for the gold standard regulators, the Europeans and the US, that are absolutely the best at this. It's not the end of the world if our technology adoption is somewhat slower than the optimal. I mean, the fact that autonomous driving may, if you deploy fully today, actually would make less mistakes net than humans make. I'm not worrying over that. I mean, eventually we'll figure out how to take advantage of that. My nuclear fission company, TerraPower, we have a reactor that in an ideal regulatory world, we would just submit our digital model and how we've done all these digital experiments, and that would be the thing the regulator would throw challenges at, just like the autonomous driving case. But they're not used to approving anything in this simulated form, and so there'll be a learning process there. Countries may try to hold back and just watch others. Now, in terms of some competitive things, including the kind of tragic application of technology to military applications, they may feel like opting out really does put them at a disadvantage. And this growing divide between how sophisticated the private companies are with their research and the government on its side is less up to date. It's very different than the entire post-World War II period, where the US government was essentially the best customer for cutting-edge technology because they could pay, for their satellite imagers or their undersea microphones or, things that blew up more energetically. They were always at the cutting edge, and so they were funding. Now the consumer market, or the business market for AI, for example, so dwarfs any government, particularly military-related application, that they're not the big funder and they're not a necessary customer for these technologies. And so we've been dealing with that as kind of a new paradigm for the last decade or so. And this AI advance makes that even more acute, that the governments didn't see it coming, and understanding where it works and where it doesn't work, that it'll take them quite a few years to catch up. The salaries in the tech sector who does this work are much higher than the government people who are supposed to think through new policies and regulate all of these activities.
Yeah, there's a role of entrepreneurs here, don't you think? Like all over the world. So, if there are like open technologies around, they can create companies. So, one of the things is how can we support emerging market, entrepreneurs? Like I know India has a lot of potential. They have entrepreneurship boom right now. It's not only in e-commerce and software companies, but they're even going deep tech. So like kind of democratizing the world like that and not falling. What we've seen in the Industrial Revolution, there were some nations come up and some nations just left behind, and we're still like, that's why the term developing countries versus developed nations came from, because developing countries are the ones that didn't catch up with the Industrial Revolution. So I'm like hoping with the AI tech and all the new tech that is coming out in medicine, biology, energy, there will be more of a, global kind of entrepreneurship coming up, not only from the, do you agree with that? Are you optimistic about that, or?
Yeah, so I'd say the new technology affects that in two ways. One is simply that if the AI gives us, say, great tutors, so you can tutor all educational topics, even basic math, reading and writing, but then all the way up to specialized topics. The speed at which countries can catch up is dramatically improved. If you're having some medical condition and you're not sure what to do, most people in Africa never have a session with a doctor their entire life. And so because these technologies, the marginal cost of actually running them, although right now it is kind of meaningful, there's so much Moore's Law type innovation that's taking place in this, those costs will, in the years ahead, get to be tiny. And so just these tools alone will aid catch up. That's in addition to the point you made, which is, okay, let's make sure the entrepreneurs there have the training and access, which again is a digital good that, there's no scarcity in making that available, so they have that opportunity. For a little while, the big companies will have more of the cloud capacity to experiment and refine these things. But eventually, just like we saw in the chip industry, where the fab and the design piece got separated, eventually in the AI world, even though right now it's Microsoft OpenAI and Google DeepMind have a very rapid innovation because they have so much compute power that they use to experiment with new ideas. That's a little bit of a vertical integration. As the cloud capacity just gets gigantic for this type of computation, then the price of it to medium and small companies, even in the rich world, will mean that if you have a breakthrough, just like in chip design, you don't have to understand the latest fab technology or have the capital for all of those things. So, I think at some point, not too long from now, these access to these kinds of models will be democratized, and it'll be whoever comes up with the best ideas around them.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful about like models like Stable Diffusion or just some inferencing on top of the LLM models working. That will be really very, very useful for entrepreneurship. You can create things on the on your phone and then start your community from there and publish your application. As they said, doctor AI or a nursing AI or like you say, tutoring or there's lots of opportunities.
Yeah, and if the open source stuff is out there, then the commercial providers have to make just the pure convenience of their thing more attractive, and so it just means the costs will go way, way, way down. Even if the open source piece doesn't end up being the dominant thing that gets used, it will drive the competitive dynamics in a pretty big way. I do think no matter who offers it, though, this ability to look at the quality, okay, I have a nurse, I have a doctor, I have a teacher. One of the innovations will be people using AI to judge other AIs, where they're created wholly separately. We have problems right now where some of these AIs don't understand when they're supposed to just be making stuff up and when they're supposed to give very factual things.
Yeah.
And some of the approaches that are being used are to have AIs kind of looking at each other. Some problems like cyber defense, you do want to have the AI doing the defense to be as good or better than the one doing the offense, and so you have a constant almost arms race in terms of getting the best AI on the side of the good guys.
Yeah, even in like coding application helpers like Copilot or Ghost Writer, there is, I remember András Karpati was talking about like having a committee of AIs, like coming up with the different answers, and then they're kind of discussing what is the best kind of code, what is the best kind of answer. So when it becomes more critical, you maybe will need a committee of kind of AIs discussing and then helping you out. So instead of having like one AI, you'll have a bunch of different versions of, or trained on different kind of algorithms and different LLM models, and then bringing you the result, and you choose from there. Or there's a higher AI that will kind of weigh them.
Now, even today, we see that where the Bing search thing is not just the latest OpenAI AI. It's a thing that goes off and uses the classic search engine to pull out lots and lots of information and then feed that to the AI and then look at the result afterwards. So it's the AI plus the sort of classic search capability combined. Yeah. And so that kind of hybrid capability is far superior than just the AI alone, which may not be fully up to date and may not have been trained enough on the topic specific information, like travel to Greece or something, whereas the combination is really kind of amazing.
Amazing, yes. Yeah, so there are like two drivers right now, I think, for the world power or growth. So one of them is compute, the other one is energy. I think energy is super crucial, especially now with all the recent events. So can we talk about that a little bit, energy?
Sure, I'd love to.
Okay, so when do you think we can have like 10x, 20x the energy with 50%, 75% less price? Is there a day like that? Like what do we need to do? What are the steps to going there? Because if we can do those, then we can kind of outgrow our problems out of debts. It's the crucial thing for us right now, with the economy situation we are in. The whole world is in.
Yeah, so first let me underscore the centrality of energy to today's modern economy. My favorite author about the physical economy, including energy, is Václav Smil, and his latest book, How the World Really Works, is to help people realize how much we take for granted that the industrial age was cheap energy, and that's when all of a sudden incomes and lifespan and everything started improving dramatically. We don't have any magic dramatic improvements that are likely to come in the next 10 years. Once you get to the 10-year boundary, then there are a number of both nuclear fission and nuclear fusion companies who feel like their approach may lead to really cheap electricity. Now, whether that'll be achieved, the amount of money and thinking going into both those areas is at an all-time high. And I'm an investor in one big fission company called TerraPower and a bunch of the at least 20 or so fusion companies. I'm in 4 of those.
But I thought TerraPower right now can be operational, no?
Yes, but in order to have our first unit approved and get another 10 and then another 100, so we become a meaningfully part of the world's energy market, that's a 10-year quest. If everything goes well for TerraPower, then 10 years from now, we could be generating 30 or 40 gigawatts of electricity, which that really does start to be meaningful. But there are people who are still skeptical. We have to solve economic issues. We have to, get people comfortable with the waste and safety issues. I'm very optimistic, so I don't want to just, promote my thing. And when you meet with these fusion people, like there's an MIT spin out called Commonwealth Fusion Systems, which in some ways is the furthest along of the many, many in that area. There is no clear lower bound on their ability to generate cheap electricity. It's possible you could get down in the, 2-3 cent per kilowatt hour, which is a huge improvement. Then, of course, you have the ongoing improvements in solar and wind, which is fantastic. Some of those can get you down in the 2 or 3 cent level. It's a little complicated, though, because you don't just want intermittent electricity, you want reliable electricity. And you want, even in the tough conditions, which tend to be very, very cold periods, where your loads are high and your generation is down, or very hot periods where the same thing happens. It's a much more complicated system to keep reliable than when it was a bunch of coal plants where they just had a pile of coal sitting next to the coal plant. And coal plants could break, but of 100 coal plants, you weren't going to have 50 of them all break at the same time. Whereas, Midwest wind, you can have a cold front. That whole part of the United States can have zero generation for wind, during very important cold periods for even like 10 days. So the speed of innovation is not going to be like chips or things, but humanity broadly is finally investing in improving renewables, in nuclear fission and fusion at a fairly serious level. In retrospect, we should have really done this like 20 years ago for energy security, as we see in Europe now, and for climate change, because these new sources, the ones people are focusing on, are all eliminating hydrocarbons. They have no greenhouse gas emissions. And in the meantime, as we generate a lot more electricity, then we have to take all the end use cases and electrify them or switch them to use green hydrogen. So the electric thing is a necessary piece. Then you have to take steel, cement, heating buildings, cars, planes, and convert those over. And so it's these two things in parallel. And that's a strange one because we actually have almost like a deadline where we've decided that the damage to ecosystems and humans, particularly living near the equator, if we don't go very, very fast in this changeover, then although the uncertainty range is very large, the likely overall impact is going to be super negative. And so, 2050, that's 27 years from now.
That is a lot. That's a long time.
Well, in the world of energy, if you conceive of, say, a transmission product today, you write it down on a piece of paper and you go out to raise money, if things go well, in 10 years, that gets built. So in terms of replacing all the world's steel plants, cement plants, transport, stuff, people like to use cars. If I buy a gasoline car in 2035, I expect to use it for a decade. And it's interesting to think about countries because that developed versus developing no longer really captures the richness. I think you need at least the 3 tiers: the rich, the middle income, and the low income. And the miracle of the last 60 years is that most people live in middle income countries: China, Brazil, Indonesia, Mexico, and
Turkey.
Yeah, good old Turkey. And that's where, understandably, most of the emissions are, about 60% of the emissions. And so the rich countries both have to get rid of their share of emissions, about 25%. and they have to use their power of innovation and their ability to subsidize new technologies to get them scaled down to where the cost of being green is zero. I call that the green premium. The rich countries really have to do that, and then they have to make it so attractive that when the middle income countries are saying, well, should we really do this, that the amount of subsidies they're asking for is either zero or very, very tiny. So it 27 years is going to go super fast in terms of what needs to be done.
27. So in breakthrough energy, in startup landscape, you see a lot of companies, don't you?
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah, so don't you see any tech that you can bet like will accelerate this for us? Or is it like the institutions and is the friction?
Well, the stage we're at today is, in 2015, the number of climate-related startups was very few, and the venture industry had realized, okay, the time frames, the amount of capital, even understand the technology, they were pretty discouraged.
Yeah.
But in these last 8 years, partly through Breakthrough Energy, which has invested in over 100 of these companies, there's been a lot of smart people going into these areas. And so in every area of emissions, there are at least 4 or 5 companies, 4 or 5 that have ideas about great steel things, 4 or 5 that have great ideas about cement, 4 or 5, there's different ways of making green hydrogen. And so there's going to be immense competition. Many of those great technologies are working well at the lab level today.
Yes.
And so the challenge, certainly call it the next 8 years or so, 5 to 10 years or so, is to team up those small companies with the big companies, like the big steel companies or oil and gas companies, and actually do these pilots. And you're going to need government regulations and in some cases government subsidies to bootstrap these things, so that you have to coordinate government, big business, small business, and often just connecting things up, making sure you have the transmission so you can get because we're using electricity for almost all these things. So you either have to connect up your new generation source or connect up your new use. And so the policy coordination is very difficult. And we see that is a limiting factor, permitting these things, permitting the transmission related to them, that, could mean that this rush to make this gigantic transformation. Green energy today is pretty small. I mean, people keep hearing about, there's a new one. That is amazing, but we're still over 80% hydrocarbon based, and of the balance, hydropower, which there isn't much upside for, a few places, but not many, that's actually the biggest single piece of that 20%. Solar and wind are coming up. I love solar and wind. We should do those as fast as we can because they are undoubtedly part of the solution.
Yeah, and it's also decentralized, so everybody can put their roofs and solar panels. So it's a good thing. But we came back to the institution next generation question, right? So in the beginning, when we were talking about other issues, you said it's okay, we can deal with if the car doesn't drive itself, but in energy, it's a huge issue. So somehow we need to, I don't know what to do about that. How can we create those next generation institutions? In your organizations, you have a institution which is your foundation. How do you keep up with the tech? So can't we mirror what your learnings are to the government institutions? What is the real friction? Is it the people? Is it the bureaucracy? What is it actually? From a layman point of view, it's they're bureaucrats. They don't want to do it, or everybody's in the charge for years. They don't think long term enough. Look at China. China thinks in 100 years terms. So we from our point of view is that, but you're in it and you have a huge foundation. So what is the real friction to generating kind of innovating permissionless in the world of atoms like we do in world of bits? This has been the problem since 1980s. We've been talking about world of atoms, world of bits. now bits kind of took over in the housing, energy. We're seeing real issues, and it's affecting the world, like society, like deeply. You know, it results wars, it results, you know, homelessness, a lot of problems. So it comes back to like full circle to the institution. So like I want to hear what you think about it.
Well, I think the institutions, when it comes to this gigantic energy transition, I think you do see progress. You know, some of the aspirations, like to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, I just don't think things will happen fast enough to achieve that, because we have very little headroom on that goal. Even the 2.0, but we are missing institutions in that this is a global problem.
Yeah.
And so if you have countries that aren't going along, you're going to have to use the trade system to somehow incentivize them, or even you know, punish them for not going along. So it takes an incredible consensus of all the countries. And some people say, well, why should our country go along? Because if they don't get all the other countries, then we just pay the price without the benefit being there. We're just helping those others. And so things like, you know, the Paris Accords, which aren't binding, but got a lot of people engaged, we're having to ad lib to have essentially a global plan to do this thing. Fighting pandemics. You know, again, that's a global problem. Pandemics are like a fire that can leap across continents and go everywhere and go very, very rapidly. And the COVID pandemic wasn't anywhere near the worst case. So that's another case where your point about institutions comes up. Yeah. That, okay, are we strengthening WHO? Do we trust WHO? If WHO sees somebody who's not practicing or doesn't have the right environmental surveillance, how do they get that person to go along? Because any country's laxity on early detection means that the whole world is at risk of being, you know, infected again. And it's very hard to stop once it gets going. You know, we do have a few cases like the institutions put in place after World War II that were to try and avoid another world war. The ozone layer, in which it turned out there were innovations that allowed replacement of the use of those chemicals. So we have a few things that have gone well. And the overall human condition, I mean, it's important to remember the background, which is that, you know, literacy, lifespans, basically every metric about the human condition is dramatically better today.
Yes, absolutely. No, there's no question about that. The thing is, like, the innovation is going so fast, and our debt is growing so fast. There's like macro problems, like demographic problems. So you look at that, you wanna like, and we're all using, you know, very good technology in our pockets, you know, like we're all using ChatGPT, you know, so there is a big discrepancy between our worlds of atoms and what we do for our productivity, for our lives, you know. So I think that's the reason why it bothers us. Yes, we're all living super compared to 10 years ago, 20, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. I mean, absolutely. But I feel like, you know, there is also an opportunity, both in terms of like entrepreneurship, what the entrepreneurs could do to make it, and also from institution point of view, there's also a role for institutions. Otherwise, it will be, the gap between world of atoms and world of bits is going to get bigger and bigger, and that will absolutely be a cause of unhappiness, even if it's not real term unhappiness.
Well, the way I think about this is that we can't just have the innovation all be in the private sector. Mm-hmm. We're going to have to take these innovations and reimagine what it means to be the medical regulator, the car safety regulator, the
absolutely.
anti-cyber attack regulator. Even, okay, you know, what does defense look like in this world of, you know, even software-driven weapons? So if we let it just be the private sector doing this, and the quality of the institution and their ability to understand and use these tools for their supervisory role, if we don't do that, then, you know, you can get some huge problems.
Yes.
And, you know, I mean, that's very stimulating, and I should think of a more succinct way to put that. So I'd say, you know, along with polarization, avoiding nuclear war, avoiding bioterror, avoiding climate change, I would put this government's being modernized to play their supervisory role in the era of AI, you know, belongs on that list of very difficult problems that, you know, smart people the world over should be thinking about.
Yes.
You know, we love our advances in biology, and, you know, I think people underestimate that we'll, you know, cut down Alzheimer's, diabetes, and all these things. Those are the same tools, sadly, that somebody who has negative intent could use to create a bioterror weapon. And so many advances are double-edged. As yet, society has managed to minimize the bad parts. But these ones are harder, and and as you've said, they're faster moving.
Yes.
You know, the idea if you went out into the field in 1900 and said, hey, 80% of you are not going to work the land, we don't need you, you know, like tomorrow, then people have been outraged, you know, the man of the soul and soil, and, you know, that's what real work is. But of course we managed through generational change in the US, who's a large net exporter of food, we managed to get that to be 2% of the labor force. So nobody complains that, you know, why aren't there more farming jobs? But it was very slow moving as mechanization came in and as other job categories in the service market, you know, that we became rich enough that the demand for those came along. Here, if you say, you know, you're going to get this displacement that used to take 50 years, you're going to get this displacement in 5 years, it means that the demand for labor is changing super dramatically within a generation. And I do worry about that. And you know, everybody says, okay, well, the government has to help with that. Well, if the government's not very sophisticated and able to drive a consensus, you know, do digitization and polarization and uncertainty about how to do with new technology, does that all make this lack of trust in government, you know, more acute and lead to instability? That would be a nightmare scenario.
I think that's one of the, like, it is maybe like you say, the living standards of all of us is so much better, but the psyche has changed. We need better, more energy, less price. You know, we need also the momentum that we're seeing in our digital world, in the you know, housing, energy, and other sectors, healthcare, that we're really suffering. It's like schizophrenic almost. You go here, it's like, you know, space odyssey. Here you're coming, it's like 1800s. Like when pandemic happens or earthquake happens, you're going back to 1800s. You're like,
no, that's, I agree, the psyche.
I'm talking
that's
about the psyche.
psyche.
Yes,
the
psyche.
truth is,
yes,
nowhere
psyche.
near as bad as that.
I know it is not as bad as that, but the psyche is like, you feel like you're alone, you're on your own. It's like, okay, like nobody really understands what's happening. That's the psyche. And I think some of the, conspiracy theories and everything comes from that psyche. It's, you know, because like you feel alone, like things like that.
Well,
happen.
if we feel like the rate of change is fast and that's daunting to us, then you have to imagine for people who are already feeling left behind and are part of this polarization, that they're going to, potentially feel even more that way. Mm-hmm. There is an irony, though, that the books written about AI 5 years ago very much talked about the physical labor jobs would be the first to go or be made more efficient. And that is still going to happen, but that's happened actually a bit slower than I would have expected. Now with this reading, writing advance, the job areas where you're going to have increased productivity is much broader, getting into the white collar services area as well.
Yeah.
So you could say, well, it's only fair. We shouldn't just have blue collar workers worried about their job. Now we're going to have white collar workers thinking, okay, how do I adapt to this changing?
Yeah, it's the coin has two sides, right? You can see it as like, oh, they're replacing software developers, but they're not really replacing them. They're making them more efficient, more. Yes, at the end you need less workers per company, but they can work on so many different ideas. You can have more companies, more innovation, more trials for the same problem. So, that kind of balances out. But I don't see institutions like Next Generation. There's a push there, like everywhere else. There is momentum, there is like energy boiling, but there is like stale institutions that doesn't move as fast or that doesn't have the motivation to learn as fast. Or how can we energize them is the question that I cannot really find an answer. Like I see some people say, okay, let's exit, let's go to a different country or something, but or let's create our communities where we can have permissionless innovation in healthcare, or I can put anything I want in my body, but those don't scale. Those are
like communes or something.
Yeah, exactly. So those are like dreamy, and you can't really do it. Like where am I going to exit with kids? They have school, they have this, they have that. It doesn't. It's not practical. For the rest of us, I think. And
yeah, so the paradox there is that at a time where we need the government institutions to be up to date and decisive and trusted, the current trend is to feel like, hey, are they really serving our interests?
Yeah.
And the polarization affects our willingness to let them play that role at a time when it's very, very much needed. So yes, that is a tricky thing. Will bright young people latch on to that problem? I sure hope so.
Yeah, there used to be brilliant people in the governments once upon a time.
Well, there's still some very capable people. It's the jobs in Congress are hard jobs, and what it takes to get elected doesn't necessarily select for technocratic capabilities. And so yes, we had people who would do things like learn the defense budget or learn the health budget, or see, okay, some schools are better than other schools, and really try and get the government to play a strong role there. That type of thinking ahead and not trying to score political points, but really just plan for the challenges that are coming.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like there's less of that. Even the ability to look at mathematically at the costs of healthcare programs and retirement programs and say, okay, there has to be some additional money collected and some adjustment to benefits to keep those going. That's a pretty basic thing, but even that, the political class hasn't distinguished itself on solving those things. So then we call them up and we say, okay, now we've got AI, so this is a more difficult thing. I do think the industry has a huge role to play in terms of suggesting solutions. Knowing that the capacity of the government is fairly modest, that the ideas may have to emerge, be proposed from people working in the industry in some way.
Okay, so if you're starting your life over, what type of company would you have built?
Well, it's very
Now,
hard.
today.
It's very hard to avoid software as the most interesting thing. And you know, AI was the dream. Okay, why are humans good at figuring things out? It was always the holy grail. In fact, you know, when I thought of going to do Microsoft, I thought, well, should I just stay and do research on AI? You know, because maybe there'll be some big breakthrough there. You know, we went a long time where these expert systems didn't actually make much progress. So I'm, you know, glad I went out and did Microsoft, a private software company,
Yeah.
and then Microsoft became big enough. It had its own research group that could get involved in those issues. So there's all sorts of great frontiers in medicine, in climate, energy type innovation. But for myself, you know, from a very young age, thinking through, hey, how do you write a program like that? Why is that person's program faster and less buggy than everyone else? My mind just totally designed itself around thinking obsessively about writing software. So I still, you know, despite AIs helping to write code, I still see that would be the best career for me.
And can we talk a little bit about mentorship? So, like, how did you get your mentorship in your earlier stage of your life?
Well, you know, I didn't really have anything that you'd formally call mentors, like where I'd check in with some senior person. I did decide that Microsoft would sell, because we didn't need any capital, but we sold 5% to a bunch of venture capitalists. And then, so we had a board of very senior people, including people like Dave Marquardt, who, you know, would temper our views of, you know, where the company would go and warn us about a lot of things. So having a board of directors, even when we were a private company, was super valuable. We also brought in people like John Shirley, who was kind of an adult, or Frank Gaudette, or Mike Maples, you know, people who'd come from other companies. And although, you know, they knew that some of the rules were unique in this company, but that a lot of the rules we were going to have to, in terms of HR and, you know, Glowing International, that we were pretty naive about those things. So mixing in people who, you know, in some cases were 30 years older than me, and making them feel valued, that even though we understood the magic incantations, that we still said, hey, you have a very important role to play in helping us with us. Eventually I got some customers, like, you know, Intel was a customer, so I wouldn't really call Andy Grove a mentor, but he challenged me, and I challenged him, which was, I think, fruitful for both of us. It wasn't a classic mentor-mentee thing, but it was, you know, hey, Intel, you don't understand software, and Andy had a view of discipline and how things were done. We also had customers like from Japan who were so quality oriented that they would just, you know, look at our processes and say, there's not enough quality here. And we're like,
what do you mean?
What do you mean?
What's quality?
And, you know, we went through 5 years of really understanding how we had to be way more serious about quality and processes that would lead to quality. And we always had some customers who were helpful. But for me personally, the senior managers, the board, reading a lot about people that had business successes. You know, there was no one mentor. I grew, Steve Ballmer and I, you know, first Paul Allen and I in terms of the vision for the company, and then Steve in terms of creating the company. We were super deep partners, and we understood each other's strengths and weaknesses. And so both, you know, those two people were critical to Microsoft doing super well. So we kind of mentored each other in the process.
So what was the biggest push you felt, like, going out of your own boundaries, and like that was not native to you, but you have to learn, like really got pushed over and over by mistakes, like you had to get that lesson,
we were lucky enough that our products did well. So even the ones that didn't succeed, we had a chance. We were by far the most aggressive about going international. And so you'd always get in these situations like in Japan where people would say, everything is different in Japan.
Yes.
And you had to know which half of the things you told them, no, those things aren't different. Just forget that.
Totally get it,
We're going to break those rules. And then there were a few things in terms of how you hired people and personnel things, or how you engaged with customers that really were a necessary part. And so mixing together in our Japanese subsidiary, us, Gaijin, with natives, and trying to get that to be a constructive engagement, not a complete serious misunderstandings. That was one of the more fun things ever. And a good friend of mine, Kazuhiko Nishi, came in and helped Microsoft figure that out, from a very early stage, where Japan was the first 10 years of Microsoft, our work in Japan was a big part of our success. Figuring out when not to write the code and how to, as you move up various layers of management, how you give the people underneath enough latitude to do their things. That was definitely a growing process. And then as the company got larger, the narrowness of the engineering working style that we were good at identifying and hiring, we had to incorporate different behavioral styles, different skill sets. And I feel very lucky that I had so much of that at Microsoft that when I went to the foundation, knowing that, okay, the people who work in the field, may not jump up and down in meetings and spot errors on slides, like I think is so important. They are out there. They better tell us, okay, when you make this new product, here's how it might succeed or not succeed. Or, late in Microsoft, the importance of having good government relations, which got, certain mistakes got us into a huge antitrust thing that was very life-threatening to the company. And so there was some maturation that went into that, even though, I thought, hey, I know the law stuff, my dad's a lawyer, but there was way more than just understanding law that went into handling government relationships. So I do feel super lucky that by age 53, when I shifted my full-time activity from Microsoft to the foundation, I was down the learning curve and quite a bit more mellow. In my 20s, I was, maniacal about, no weekends, no vacations, and things that really only in tiny little companies are those sustainable.
What's the one business strategy that always works for you?
Well, if you pick the most demanding customer in an area who is viewed as recognized as the most demanding customer, and then you just manage when their business, it simplifies things a lot. That you don't do that many marketing studies, and you engage them deeply in what they need. That works very well. For things like Office, the nice thing was that these were tools that we wanted to use. We wanted a good word processor, spreadsheet, PowerPoint, and all those things. So, we just understood what was good. But then as we got into all sorts of complex enterprise systems, we didn't have a natural feel for what is important. So we had to build around that. But I think, knowing the customer, that if they don't accept your product, you're going to feel like, wow, we better rethink everything. If we're not good enough for them. What are we doing? And finding those customers that are in the cutting edge means the other customers aren't demanding those features yet. So if you get them before everyone realizes, okay, you have to support cloud computing, then you're ahead of the game. We were very good at assuming that the hardware would get infinitely good, like computing would be cheap. The one place we really messed that up, and it was during the antitrust trial, was we didn't assume that the phones would get really nice touchscreens and big processors. And so Apple and Google, Apple with its own OS, and Google with Android, satisfied that high end. And that's such a mistake. I had written memos saying to never make that mistake. That was during the antitrust trial, and you can't do everything right. But that was a real huge mistake. The fact that what was called the Windows Mobile doesn't have the place that Android has. Other things you can say, like, hey, how come you didn't do the first search engine? Well, that wasn't in our scope. Google was born on that wave, and we came in and did some great work. I don't feel bad that there are going to be things like that, but Android for a cell phone, that was ours to lose, and it took a lot of mistakes to lose it. But once you lose it, that only gets recontested in this deep personal agent AI world. Then the OS layer becomes completely unimportant. So, fortunately, eventually you get to try again.
But there is like new wave next time.
Yeah,
Which is coming, AI.
But the personal agent driven by AI is, that is your search UI, your e-commerce UI, your productivity UI. It kind of takes categories that have existed separately and brings them into kind of, okay, whose personal agent do I want all my communications and activities to be born out of?
Last question. How do you deal with adversity and conflicts?
I didn't have a lot of adversity. I grew up in a upper middle class family. My dad was a lawyer. I enjoyed school, and I had kind of a niche in my private school as kind of the math science guy, which was very comfortable. Like, we know who he is, and he's the math science guy. And so even though my social skills weren't very good, I still knew where I fit. Then when I went to Harvard, it was more like, wow, there's a lot of math science guys here. How do I compare and differentiate?
Is that why you quit?
No, I loved, you can describe most everything I've done my whole life as being a student. I buy more of these courses and watch more of these courses than most anyone, I think. And so, no, being at Harvard, they fed us. We didn't have the internet to correct whatever misstatements of facts were going on.
Or did your homework.
Yeah, it was very primitive days. And so, and then even early Microsoft, say it had failed, I could have gone, gone back to Harvard or done any type of job. I did feel like hiring people who had families, were moving them and counting on me. I was always worried about not being able to make payroll, and so I was financially super conservative, that I wanted to have enough in the bank if no customer paid us to pay the payroll for 2 years. And I'm glad, I had that kind of conservative view. I had seen digital equipment essentially go bankrupt. Wang really went bankrupt. So I understood that even companies that were great in a way, as they lost critical mass, that things could fall apart very quickly. The antitrust lawsuit was a gigantic setback.
How do you deal with it personally?
I've been so lucky that it's not like I can complain, and anything bad that happens to you, you should have anticipated. the fact that we were right on the law was just this narrow view that misled me. And our initial team who worked on that antitrust lawsuit kind of reinforced that view. Then we got a new team of people as things were going very poorly. And Brad Smith and other people came in and educated me that the way I was looking at it, was wrong. And then we, started to settle suits and all sorts of things. And eventually we were damaged by that.
Yeah.
But, we got through it. It probably did accelerate my decision to move on and do foundation work. But by then, I didn't think my unique contribution to Microsoft was as great as what I saw, that nobody was organizing innovation for global health, things like malaria and HIV. And so I think the antitrust lawsuit, as much as it was very painful, did mature me and make me see that, letting other people worry about Microsoft and really take that on, that they would do better at it. In a way, I was almost too close to it. And since the antitrust thing, although it's kind of an exaggeration, felt like a near-death experience, that maybe it was time for somebody who didn't have their identity so tied up in the success of the company, like I did as one of the founders. And Steve ran it, and actually the company did fine. And now Satya Nadella is a fantastic CEO, and even willing to take some advice from me from time to time.
That's amazing. So I forgot to say ask one more thing to you about some personal thing. So as a personal value, what do you value the most? What do you advise your kids in personal life? I just want to have that as the last question.
Okay. Well, fulfillment comes from the people and how you help them or how they support you. And you can get some of that from your work. And in my 20s, I was very focused on that. But in the course of time, you get more of that from family and friends. I eventually got married. Melinda, showed me there was a lot more than just working all the time. We took vacations. We had 3 amazing kids. One of those kids had a kid, so now I'm a grandfather. And I've gotten a lot of fulfillment out of having friends who've been on this journey with me. Both the people I worked with, although that's a little tricky, a lot of them worked for me, but still it was a very bonding experience. So relationships that were helpful to people as you get into your 60s, and I'm 67 now, you realize how important that is, even beyond having done great work.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All right.
That was amazing. Thank you.
Excellent.